The Galactic Academy shimmered beneath the twin suns of Valtris Prime, its towers made of transparent alloys that refracted the light into rainbow halos. Across its central plaza, hundreds of cadets from dozens of alien species gathered in hushed anticipation. Today marked the beginning of the final and most feared challenge of their training. The Cavarin Maze was not a normal labyrinth. Built thousands of years ago by the now extinct Zarathi race, the Cavarin Maze was buried deep within the Academy's subterranean training chambers. No one truly understood how it worked. Its walls were semi-organic, pulsing faintly with energy signatures that resisted scans. Its structure shifted in unpredictable patterns. Most notoriously, it neutralized technology, navigation units, power sources, even light-enhancing visors. Everything failed inside. For generations, cadets had entered with confidence and emerged humbled. Some came out raving about moving walls. Others were found days later, curled into corners, whispering nonsense. Despite all advancements in galactic engineering, the maze remained a mystery. And that was precisely the point. Eli stood at the edge of the platform overlooking the descent tunnel. He was the only human cadet in this year's cohort. Shorter than most of the other trainees, lean and quiet, he had often been overlooked during combat drills and strategy discussions. The Vornik twins, towering insectoids from Sector G7, had even joked that humans should stick to cooking or diplomacy. Eli never responded. He just watched, listened, and remembered. Now he adjusted his grip on his utility belt. Not that any of it would work down there. He had been told repeatedly that the maze's energy field would kill his flashlight, erase his map files, and fry his backup sensors. It was part of the challenge. Eli hadn't bothered bringing any of that. Instead, he had spent the night before studying Earth's ancient labyrinth stories. Minotaurs, mirrored halls, caves mapped by monks who could not see. Humans had solved puzzles long before satellites existed. He believed that would be enough. A tall, lizard-skinned instructor named Commander Tassal raised his voice through a translator. "This is not a test of strength, not a test of speed. You will not be watched. There are no cameras inside. You will not be tracked. You are alone, and you will find your way out. Or not." One by one, the cadets stepped forward. The first to enter was a Glavori noble, her shimmering feathers twitching with each step. She carried 4 drones on her back. The drones immediately sparked and fell to the floor upon entry. Murmurs rose. The second cadet, a muscular Draxian with bone-plated arms, grunted and walked in with a small plasma axe. It flickered out within seconds. The third was a Siloan, who relied entirely on echolocation and tech lenses. He froze in place and turned back almost immediately. Eli waited. By the time he was called, 15 cadets had gone in. 2 had already emerged, breathing heavily, their pride wounded. Eli stepped to the edge and stared into the darkness of the entrance. It wasn't even a dramatic threshold, just a sloped tunnel cut from stone with faintly glowing walls that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. He took a breath, cracked his neck once, and stepped in. The silence wrapped around him instantly. All background hums, all idle sounds from the academy above were gone. It was as if the maze swallowed the world behind him. Eli felt the temperature drop. The walls, previously glowing, dimmed the deeper he walked. He reached into his jacket and took out a single piece of chalk and a small rock with 3 notches on it. He had no use for tech. What he carried was memory and earth instincts. As he advanced, he counted under his breath. 1, 2, 3. He didn't just count steps, he counted breaths between turns, changes in airflow, textures under his boots. The floor was smooth at first, then it shifted to something spongier. That was notable. He rubbed his fingers against the right wall. Dry and slightly warm. He tapped it twice. Solid. He touched the left wall. Cooler. Slightly damp, he continued. After 47 steps, he reached the first fork. It was sharp. An L-shaped junction. Both paths looked identical. No markings, no signs. Eli took the rock from his pocket and scratched a notch into the wall where he had come from. Then he turned right, not because it felt more promising, but because his instincts told him to always follow a pattern. He would go right, then left, then right again. If he returned to the same mark, he'd adjust the pattern. The silence wasn't empty. It was thick. Breathing echoed back strangely, like the maze was listening. Eli had expected this. He didn't trust the echoes. He trusted only what he felt. His boots slid slightly as the floor texture changed again, now grainy, like sand mixed with rubber. He paused. A corridor that shifts surface texture meant it moved. He marked the corner with chalk and took 20 steps forward. At step 21, the path curved, though no turn was visible. He walked in what should have been a straight line, yet felt the centrifugal tug of a gentle arc. He smiled slightly. The maze wasn't just a series of walls. It was a creature pretending to be stone. Somewhere far behind him, a faint shriek echoed. Another cadet must have fallen into a loop. Eli crouched, touched the floor and sniffed the air. Sulfur. That meant a vent nearby. Vents always indicated breathing tunnels, places where the maze shifted fastest. He stood, marked the wall, and took the left path instead. His mental map updated. The left vent path would rotate, but the right would stay static. His pace remained steady, 72 steps. Then another turn. Then darkness. He touched the chalk in his pocket, but didn't mark anything. Instead, he pulled a small rope from his belt, thin, nearly invisible, tied it to a stone outcrop, and let it trail behind him. A test. If the rope snapped or changed direction, the maze had shifted. After 20 steps, he looked back. The rope was no longer taut. It had moved. He turned and returned to the junction. Just in time. The corridor he had just walked was now sealed behind a smooth wall. He exhaled once, not from fear, but acknowledgement. So this was how the Cavarin Maze operated. Not randomly, but in rhythm. Like a song. Like a predator testing its prey. But Eli wasn't prey. He was patient. And patience was something most of the other species lacked. They relied on scanners, energy, predictions. He relied on footsteps, airflow, pressure under his fingers, and how dust settled in corners. By the time he found the first chamber wide, circular with 7 exits, he had already mapped 3 shifts, 4 misleading echo loops, and 1 corridor that had tried to seal behind him. He had escaped that by wedging his boot under the threshold. It cost him his left soul, but not his life. He didn't rest in the chamber. He knew it would shift. Instead, he walked slowly around it, counting the exits, marking each with a number in chalk. He noted airflow again. The 4th exit had no breeze. The 6th had warmth. The 7th smelled faintly of copper. That was a clue. Copper meant metal, and metal meant deeper infrastructure. He chose the 7th. As he passed through the archway, the door behind him slid closed. Not with malice, just with purpose. The maze was not trying to kill him. It was trying to teach him. Eli was determined to learn, and so he disappeared deeper into the darkness, not with fear, but with measured certainty, counting every step, memorizing every shift, and trusting not in machines, but in his own humanity. Eli walked deeper into the corridor that smelled faintly of copper. The path narrowed slightly, just enough for his shoulders to brush both sides if he turned too sharply. The floor remained stable, but emitted a soft vibration, not unlike the low hum of old power lines on Earth. It wasn't dangerous, but it felt like the maze was aware of his presence, sensing his weight and adjusting accordingly. That only made him more alert. He moved without hesitation, pacing himself like a trained scout, his breathing even, his steps deliberate. At one point, the passage sloped downward, and he counted every rise and dip, noting with each shift in elevation how the temperature subtly changed. As he descended, it grew cooler, not freezing, just enough to feel the sweat drying on the back of his neck. He slowed, touched the wall with his fingertips, and let his fingers trail across the faint ridges that had formed naturally or unnaturally across the surface. They formed a pattern. Vertical lines intersected by small diagonal slashes, repeating every 7 paces. It was like a tactile code. He couldn't read it, not exactly, but he understood that it wasn't random. He pressed his hand flat against the wall and closed his eyes. With his other hand, he took a piece of chalk from his belt and etched a circle with a vertical line through it, a sign for himself. He had to remember this area in case he needed to backtrack. When he opened his eyes again, he felt a strange sensation. The air had changed. It was heavier now, with a distinct mineral tang. That could mean proximity to a central chamber or a rotational axis. The floor beneath him groaned, not loudly, but just enough to vibrate through the soles of his boots. He crouched instinctively and placed his palm flat against the ground. The vibration pulsed every few seconds, consistent, mechanical. A timer. He glanced ahead. The corridor split into 3 archways, one to the left, one forward, one to the right. He didn't move immediately. Instead, he pulled a thread from his pouch and gently tied one end to a floor groove just before the intersection. The thread would tell him if the path rotated while he wasn't looking. He waited. 10 seconds. Then 20. At 35 seconds, the vibration spiked. Sharper, more urgent. A faint scraping sound echoed from above. He looked up. No ceiling panels had moved, but the entire corridor groaned again, this time with weight. Something above had shifted. A trap? Possibly, or just another mechanism to mislead. He picked the forward path, not at random, but based on airflow again. A soft breeze met his skin, bringing with it a hint of moisture. That could mean an underground spring or simply condensation vents. Either way, it was better than dry silence. As he advanced, his mind kept working. Every 20 steps he pressed a thumbprint into the dustier sections of the wall, just enough to leave a visible trace. If he came back and saw no print, it meant the wall had rotated or been replaced. The maze was never still. 50 steps in, he paused. A shape emerged ahead, a silhouette crouched in the shadows. Eli tensed, unsure if it was alive. He reached slowly into his belt, fingers brushing the edge of a small, earth-made whistle. It didn't produce sound in the usual sense, but its frequency could trigger vibrations to detect movement. He blew once, softly. The shape didn't flinch. He stepped forward. It was a cadet, a male Zelthian, one of the top-performing species in the academy. Tall, serpentine, with emerald-scaled limbs and 4 glowing eyes. But now he sat slumped against the wall, panting. His breathing was ragged, and his translator badge flickered faintly on his chest. Eli knelt beside him. "You okay?" he asked, though he knew the translator probably wouldn't carry the message clearly through the distortion field. He repeated the question in Galactic Standard, broken as it was. The Zalthian looked at him weakly and shook his head. The cadet gestured behind him. Eli leaned forward and listened. A corridor trap had collapsed. Literally. The path he had entered from was now sealed by stone, and the cadet had no idea how to proceed. His gear was dead, his navigation lens cracked, his claws trembled with fatigue. Eli didn't panic. He offered the cadet his water capsule, one of 3 he had brought, rationed with extreme precision. The Zelthian drank in short bursts, nodding gratefully. Eli scanned the walls. There were 4 exit paths from the chamber, but none were lit. No breeze, no sound, no smell. That meant the maze was trying to mask the real path forward. He sat down, closed his eyes, and visualized the walk here. Every turn, every shift in air pressure, every change in floor texture. He replayed the entry route in his mind and realized something important. The left path at the 3-way fork had rotated while he waited, which meant the spatial alignment was no longer absolute. He stood, motioned for the Zelthian to follow, and returned to the corridor entrance, counting steps backward. The cadet followed, confused but obedient. Eli stopped after 32 steps, pressed his ear to the wall, and knocked softly. 3 taps. The 3rd tap echoed longer than the others. Buffalo. He took a nearby shard of metal from the floor and wedged it into a gap between 2 stones. With effort, he twisted. The wall creaked just slightly and revealed a thin crevice, yet, but enough to indicate a transition chamber. He whispered, "Wait here," and squeezed through. The air shifted instantly. It was warmer and smelled of burnt dust, a sign of friction. He stepped into a new corridor, one he hadn't seen marked on the entry map provided during orientation. This was a maintenance path, unofficial, likely used by the original Zarathi constructors. It bypassed the main maze routes. He felt the walls. They were rougher, more natural, not grown like the rest of the maze, but carved. He returned to the cadet and helped him through. The passage was narrow but just wide enough. Together they moved carefully, Eli leading with quiet confidence. At one point, the Zelthian stopped and asked in a raspy voice, "How do you know this will work?" Eli didn't answer immediately. He thought for a moment, then replied, "Because I stopped trying to beat the maze. I started listening to it instead." That silenced the cadet. After another 100 steps, the corridor opened into a dome-shaped chamber. Above, bioluminescent growths lit the walls like constellations. The air was fresh. A small pool rippled at the center. Eli dropped to his knees and touched the water. It was real, drinkable. He helped the cadet kneel and drink as well. They rested there for a few minutes. Eli didn't sleep, but he closed his eyes and let the silence speak. He traced patterns in the dust, marking paths, calculating angles. Then he opened his eyes and whispered, "We go that way next." The cadet blinked. "Why?" Eli smiled faintly. "Because the dust here blows in from that tunnel. That means airflow. That means space. That means the maze is breathing in that direction." And so they walked, Eli in front, his fingers gently grazing the walls, his eyes scanning for patterns invisible to most. The maze didn't frighten him. It spoke in ways only the patient could hear. Every footstep, every vibration, every change in scent was part of its language. And Eli, unlike anyone else, was fluent in it. The passage ahead was narrower than the last, sloping upward at a gentle incline that pulsed with warmth. Eli moved without hesitation, his hand trailing lightly along the left wall as he stepped softly on the uneven stone beneath his boots. The Zalthian cadet followed closely, his breathing steadier now, his steps more sure. Though exhausted, the alien had stopped questioning Eli's choices. He no longer asked for reasons. He simply mirrored the human's pace, mimicking the same silent, deliberate movement. As they climbed, the ambient heat grew denser. It clung to their skin and scales, making each breath feel like inhaling mist through cloth. Eli paused only when the air changed, suddenly drier, sharper, filled with the bitter scent of scorched metal. He turned his head slightly, listening. No vibrations now, no shifting walls, only silence. And then, faintly, a sound. It came from somewhere ahead and to the right, not footsteps, not stone, a voice. He gestured for the Zalthian to stop, then crept forward, ears straining. The voice echoed again, hoarse, cracked, but unmistakably alive. A cry. Not of pain, but of desperation. Eli narrowed his eyes and turned into a tight corridor leading off the main incline. It had no markings, no airflow, and no change in wall texture, but he felt the difference in the temperature. It dropped with each step. Soon the warmth vanished, replaced by a cold that wrapped around his neck like damp cloth. He advanced until he saw movement, just a flash of motion, and dropped into a crouch. In the center of a hollow chamber sat another cadet. A male Turnavian, barely taller than Eli but much stockier, his dark armor dented, his forelimbs trembling as he muttered to himself in his native tongue. He rocked slightly, clutching a broken energy baton. His translator badge blinked red. Non-functional. He hadn't noticed Eli's approach. Eli stood slowly and stepped into the chamber, making just enough noise to be heard. The Turnavian flinched, instinctively raising his broken baton. When he saw the human, his posture slackened. "You're real," the cadet whispered in fractured galactic standard. "I thought the maze was copying voices." Eli nodded once. "I'm real." The Turnavian stared at him, eyes bloodshot. "Everything broke. My beacon, my tracker. I went in circles. My rations ran out. I screamed for help for hours." "How long have you been here?" Eli asked. 3 hours. Maybe more. I found this place and thought it was safe, but I kept hearing myself, my voice from the walls. Eli stepped closer and examined the chamber. The walls were reflective but not mirror-like. Instead, they created echoes, visual and auditory, that bent slightly with the humidity. He didn't like it. The room was a trap, designed to fragment a mind already under pressure. "You'll go mad if you stay," Eli said. "Come with me." The Turnavian hesitated, but when the Zalthian appeared behind Ellie, his expression shifted. Seeing another cadet following the human gave him something to grasp. He rose shakily, dropped the broken baton and stepped forward. Eli took a small, markless stone from the floor and tossed it toward the far wall. It bounced once, then again, then disappeared mid-air. Not behind a wall, not through a crack. It simply vanished. He turned to the others. "Don't touch that side." The Turnavian nodded wordlessly, following Eli out of the chamber with slow, dragging steps. Now, with 2 cadets behind him, Eli returned to the main incline and continued climbing. His thoughts sharpened. He had to reorient the mental map to accommodate the detour. That meant adjusting his internal count. He recalculated the path forward based on memory. 76 steps up, 13 right, then split. But now, the layout had shifted again. The climb ended in a flat ledge that opened into a spiraling gallery, a series of ramps winding upward around a hollow shaft that extended farther than his eyes could see. Bioluminescent moss lit the path in uneven patches, flickering faintly. The ramps were narrow, and the walls hummed with kinetic energy, like pressure waiting to release. Eli tested the edge by dropping a pebble. It bounced once, then disappeared into the shaft without sound. He waited for impact. None came. He looked back at the others. Step slow, they followed him in a single file, the Zalthian behind him, the Turnavian taking the rear. The gallery wall curved continuously, and, as they walked, Eli counted his steps silently, marking intervals of 20 by tapping the edge of his boot against the inner wall. After 200 paces, the moss vanished completely, replaced by polished stone that reflected nothing. It became harder to track direction. That's when the sound began. It wasn't mechanical. It was whispering. Soft. Familiar. He froze. The others didn't hear it, or at least they gave no sign. Eli turned his head and listened again. "Eli," the voice repeated. "Turn around." It was his voice. Slightly distorted, but unquestionably his. He clenched his jaw, slowed his breath, and touched the wall. It felt warm. Too warm for a passage that had been cold just seconds before. The whisper came again, now from the right side of the ramp. "Don't go up. It's a trap." Eli closed his eyes and focused. The voice wasn't coming from a location. It was resonating inside the corridor itself, projected through vibration, a psychological test. An echo of his own words, likely captured earlier and played back now, using the maze's organic sound channels. He pressed 2 fingers to the stone. There. A thrum behind the voice. A hidden pattern. "Forward," he whispered. "Ignore the lies." The cadets obeyed without question. They moved past the whisper zone, and the sound began to fade. Another 40 steps, and they reached a cross-section. 2 options. An upward ramp that led toward a dimly glowing arch, or a narrow passage with no light, just a slight draft. Eli hesitated. The glowing path was too inviting. It was too obvious. He dropped to one knee, touched the floor, and traced the dust with his finger. No footprints in the lighted path. None. But in the darkness there were 2 faint indentations in the dust, boot-sized. He wasn't the first. He pointed toward the dark path. "That way." The Zalthian looked uneasy. "The other one looks safer." "Exactly," Eli replied. They entered the dark tunnel, and the moment they passed the threshold, a door slammed behind them. A sharp hiss of air. The passage sealed. Trapped again. But Eli smiled. "Good," he muttered. "It means we're going the right way." The tunnel turned downward in a spiral, but the floor was damp. Moisture dripped from above, pooling beneath their boots. The Turnavian grunted. "What now?" Eli placed his hand against the right wall and felt the pulse again. Faster than before, like a countdown. He whispered, "The maze is accelerating." "Why?" the Zalthian asked. "It knows we're close." They continued moving, the passage narrowing until they had to move sideways. The Turnavian's broader shoulders scraped the wall. Each movement echoed. The humidity pressed against their skin. Then suddenly the tunnel dropped vertically. No warning, no steps, just a sheer hole. Eli knelt and dropped a glow bead, one of the few items that still worked. It fell for 10 meters, bounced on soft ground, and remained lit. He turned to the others. "We jump. I go first." He climbed into the hole and let himself slide. He landed hard, rolled once, and rose immediately. The others followed. When they hit the bottom, the air changed again. Fresh, clean, like mountain wind. Ahead stood another chamber, larger than the rest. Arches ran along each wall, but only one glowed, faintly blue. Eli didn't move yet. He stared at the floor, tiles of different colors, some cracked, some pristine. A pattern, not random. He picked up a shard from one of the cracked tiles and tossed it onto a red square. Nothing happened. He tried another shard on a green square. Immediate hiss, and the tile turned black, then disintegrated. He looked at the blue-lit arch, then down again. Blue tiles. He stepped only on blue. After 6 careful steps, the floor rippled, but held. He reached the arch and waited for the others. One misstep would kill them. But they followed exactly, mirroring his movements. Once all 3 passed through the arch, the tiles behind them vanished, sucked into the floor, as if they had never existed. The maze was done with them here. Eli exhaled, his mind already mapping the next leg of the path. The walls here no longer pulsed. The light was stable, but that only meant one thing. They were entering the center zone, and the maze wasn't done yet. The passage beyond the blue-lit arch pulsed with a quiet, rhythmic hum, so low it resonated more in the chest than in the ears. The walls here were different. They didn't just shift in shape or material. They breathed. Not metaphorically, but with real motion. Eli paused only for a moment before stepping forward, feeling the subtle give beneath his boots. This was no ordinary corridor. The stone beneath his feet rose and sank in minuscule waves, like the surface of a sleeping creature. Behind him, the Zalthian and the Turnavian followed silently. The air felt cooler again, but clean. For the first time since entering the maze, Eli saw structured architecture. Arches, alcoves, and hexagonal grooves lining the walls. The light emanated from crystalline threads running along the ceiling, blinking slowly in alternating patterns. It reminded him of heartbeat monitors, and that thought alone tightened something in his chest. He walked carefully, placing his feet only where the stone was firmest. With each step he adjusted the weight distribution, testing the subtle resistance. The corridor ended abruptly at a tall doorway sealed by interlocking metallic plates. No handles, no visible mechanism, but there was a seam, narrow, vertical, barely noticeable. He ran his fingers along it and felt a residual warmth, as though the door had recently opened or closed. Without speaking, he motioned for the Turnavian to help him inspect the base. Together they examined the structure, and Eli noted the floor had several notches, like grooves intended to hold something in place. He stood up and looked at the adjacent wall. Then he tapped a nearby tile with his knuckle. It echoed oddly, hollow but sharp. He turned to the others. "This isn't a wall, it's a switch." "How do you know?" the Turnavian asked. Eli stepped back. The sound, he pulled out a piece of metal rod he had carried from the earlier maintenance shaft and wedged it into the seam between tiles. With a controlled motion, he pried the panel open. A hiss of air escaped, followed by a soft grinding sound. The wall panel slid aside, revealing a small control node. Zorathian in design, covered in etched symbols none of them could read. Eli stared at it, then moved his hand over the interface without touching it. The node responded to motion. 4 concentric circles lit up, pulsing in an inward sequence. He recognized the pattern. It was reactive, not a button, a rhythm-based system. He took a breath, then began tapping his finger in sync with the lights. Once, twice, pause, once again, then twice more. The sequence repeated. On the 3rd cycle, the outer ring flashed white and vanished. The metallic doorway groaned, then separated into 3 segments that slid apart like unfolding wings. Beyond the door lay a circular room, massive, domed, and entirely unlike anything they had seen before. The floor was a deep, reflective obsidian, yet warm to the touch. Strange glyphs hovered mid-air, rotating silently. The walls had no edges, no corners, only curves that shifted slowly, as if the chamber itself was rotating. Eli stepped inside cautiously. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the door sealed behind him and the 2 cadets. The room made a low, grinding noise, and the entire floor shifted beneath them. Not enough to throw them off balance, but just enough to make the stomach turn. The dome above lit up. A projection. But not of stars, nor maps. Of the maze itself. a giant living blueprint in motion, and at its center, a rotating axis chamber marked with a flickering blue core. Eli realized where they were. "This is the engine," he whispered. "The room that moves the rest of the maze." "How do we get out?" the Zelthian asked. Eli didn't answer. He was already calculating. The maze was never random. Its confusion was curated. This room must control the paths that shifted, and yet there were no levers, no controls, only rhythm and motion. He walked slowly to the center platform where the glyphs floated. Each symbol shifted orientation with the floor's motion. He reached out and passed his hand through one. The symbol changed color, red to blue, and the room pulsed once, like an intake of breath. He turned. "It's not a control room, it's a test chamber." The floor rotated again, this time faster. The three cadets struggled to stay balanced. From the ceiling, 6 panels slid open, revealing small orbs that descended and hovered at head height. Each orb had a glowing ring on its surface, pulsing independently. Then one darted forward, fast. It slammed into the wall beside the Turnavian, narrowly missing him. Eli lunged and yanked the Turnavian out of the way. Another orb shot toward the Zalthian, who ducked instinctively. The orbs weren't random. They targeted motion. Any movement not synced with the pulse. Eli stood still, watching. The rings on the orbs pulsed with a fixed frequency, 3 beats per 5 seconds, a pattern. He mimicked the rhythm with his breath, then with his steps, moving slowly in time. The orb that had been circling him stopped. It floated silently, then drifted away. He called to the others, "Match the pulse, move only when the rings blink." The Zalthian obeyed first, his long limbs swaying awkwardly. He nearly stumbled but managed to correct his rhythm. The Turnavian struggled, but eventually fell into step. The orbs slowly began to withdraw. Once the room quieted again, the glyphs reappeared, this time in 2 rows, shifting positions. Eli scanned them, then touched the same blue symbol from earlier. It vanished. The dome projection above changed, this time showing a path from the chamber to the surface. The Turnavian gasped. "That's the exit." "Almost," Eli said. "We have to align the room with the path." He looked around for a rotational mechanism. There was none. The only way was to physically move with the room, trigger its response manually. He gestured to the others. "We walk, clockwise, stay in rhythm. We guide the room by presence." The 3 cadets began moving in synchronized formation, their feet gliding smoothly across the floor. The dome above flickered, once, twice, then the projection shifted. The path brightened. The room's outer ring clicked into place, and the air pressure dropped sharply, followed by a long, low vibration. Eli braced himself. The room was moving, not just spinning, but descending. After several seconds, the movement stopped. The domed ceiling opened like a flower blooming, revealing a staircase bathed in natural light. Real light, warm, from above. The Zalthian collapsed to his knees. The Turnavian let out a choked laugh. Eli didn't stop. He walked to the staircase and placed one hand on the warm stone. He looked back at the others. "Not yet. The maze gives us a path, but we still have to walk it." And with that, he led them upward, toward whatever challenge remained. The maze had tested their endurance, their minds, and their instincts. Now it was testing their belief, and Eli was ready to answer. Eli ascended the spiral staircase with one hand lightly grazing the smooth stone railing, the other hanging loose by his side. His breath was calm, measured, though his muscles ached from hours of silent movement and his boots were soaked through. The light above was not artificial. It was golden, natural, filtering down like sunlight through the canopy of a living forest. It warmed his skin and cast long shadows behind him. The Zalthian followed 2 steps behind, his limbs trembling but coordinated. The Turnavian came last, each step slower than the last, his broad shoulders scraping the sides of the narrowing stairwell. But neither of them hesitated now. They trusted Eli. The staircase led not to an exit, but to a domed chamber open to the sky. Real sky. Above them stretched a false horizon, projected by the Academy's environmental simulation grid, but it was designed to mimic the conditions outside. A cool wind blew across the platform, rustling the hem of Eli's uniform. The center of the chamber was bare stone, carved into a circular symbol, one matching the floor pattern in the central room they had just left. Eli stepped into the middle and knelt, not out of exhaustion, but reverence. The maze had not been a series of puzzles, it had been a living thing, a sentient test. It had watched him from the beginning. It had twisted and reshaped itself around his presence, not to defeat him, but to measure him. And now, at the final chamber, it was still waiting. The Zalthian spoke first. "We're above ground. Why is there no door?" Eli didn't answer. He closed his eyes and placed his hand on the stone glyph. The temperature changed slightly. The wind died. The simulated sun dimmed. And from somewhere far below, a deep rumble began. Long, distant, growing louder. Then the floor moved, not violently, not as a threat, but as part of a mechanism awakening. The circular symbol under Eli's hand glowed pale blue, and stone spirals emerged from the platform's edges, forming steps downward. The staircase didn't descend into darkness, but into a crystalline corridor that had not existed a moment before. The air became fragrant, sharp with ozone and metallic sweetness. Something ancient stirred within the corridor, as though the Zorathi presence had been reawakened. Eli rose and turned to the others. "This is the true path." He led them downward again, deeper into what should have been the heart of the maze, but instead of confusion or chaos, they found clarity. The corridor was linear. It didn't pulse or whisper. It didn't curve or seal behind them. It led to a chamber unlike any they had seen. This room was not made of stone or synthetic alloy. It was grown. Veins of crystal, blue and white, ran across its floor and ceiling, and in the center stood a dais with 3 glowing pedestals. Hovering above the central pedestal was an orb of compressed light, rotating silently, its surface rippling with coded energy. As Eli approached, it lowered slightly, recognizing presence. The Turnavian stopped short. "Is this the core?" Eli nodded. "This is what the maze protects." Pulse of energy scanned across the room. The orb shifted again, then released a short burst of light. A holographic map unfurled above them showing the maze, every level, every hidden passage, every chamber. Paths blinked in red where cadets still wandered, lost. 2 points pulsed in amber, rescue requests. Eli stared at the map, then touched the interface with 3 fingers. The room responded instantly. He turned to the others. "We can guide them out." The Zalthian stepped forward, disbelief etched across his face. "You mean, it listens?" Eli looked at him and said softly, "It listens to those who listen first." One by one, he highlighted the lost cadets, directing the glowing map to form corridors from their locations to the central chamber. The maze obeyed. Walls shifted, hidden passages opened, exit routes realigned. This wasn't just a test of survival. This was command access, meant only for those the maze deemed worthy. A final prompt appeared in the air. "Do you wish to end the trial?" Eli pressed his palm against the projection. "Yes." The orb pulsed once more and vanished. A low hum filled the air as a new passage opened behind them. Arched, stable, marked by the Academy's crest. This was the official exit, not the illusionary paths designed to confuse. This one led home. They walked through it side by side. When they emerged, the light blinded them momentarily. The open courtyard of the Academy welcomed them with silence. Instructors, officials, and cadets stood frozen in place, staring at the emergence point. The Academy had prepared medical staff for injured students, but no one expected 3 to walk out upright, one of them, human, guiding the others. Commander Sasal stepped forward, his eyes narrowing at the sight. "You were in the core," he said. "That place hasn't been reached in decades." Eli nodded once. The Turnavian, his voice hoarse, said, "He saved us. And more than that, he rewrote the maze." An instructor checked the monitors. The maze map had shifted. Dozens of cadets were now en route to the exit paths, guided by new channels that hadn't existed before. Word spread quickly. Cadets who had mocked him now whispered his name. Eli didn't bask in it. He stepped aside, letting the Turnavian receive medical assistance first, then helped steady the Zelthian, who had begun to collapse from fatigue. Commander Tassal approached Eli and spoke in a tone low enough for no one else to hear. "You didn't win the test. You became part of it." Eli didn't respond. Tassal continued, "The maze has always judged, but it never acted until now." Eli turned his eyes to the horizon, where the towers of the academy glinted under the artificial sky. "That's because it never found someone who asked the right questions." A silence settled between them. Tassal stepped back and addressed the assembled crowd. "The human cadet has completed the Cavarin Maze, he has accessed the core, he has restructured the sequence, and he has ensured the survival of others. Let this be recorded." The acknowledgement was brief but absolute. Later that night, in his dormitory, Eli sat alone, staring at the holographic blueprint of the maze stored on his tablet. Not the official version, but the one burned into his memory. Every twist, every floor vibration, every silent clue. He had marked a path through the unknowable. And it had answered. Outside, under the twin moons of Valtris Prime, the Academy buzzed with new questions. About humans, about intuition, about what the Zerathi might have intended when they built a maze that only responded to those who refused to command it by force. Eli didn't care for the fame. He had done what he knew was right. He had walked, listened, remembered, and helped. That was enough. The next morning, a new directive was issued. Instinctual mapping and non-technological navigation would be added to the Galactic Academy's core training modules. It would be named after the cadet who first passed the Cavarin Maze on memory and breath alone. And so the human walked forward, not into legend, but into purpose.